Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here again, ready to take, well, a pretty hefty stack of research and ideas and really break them down into something useful for you. Before we really get into the weeds today, I want you to maybe just take a second. Do a quick mental check-in on your past week or even month. Think about those moments. They're probably pretty rare, right? Where you're just intensely focused. The rest of the world just kind of melts away. Maybe you were, I don't know, head down in a spreadsheet, wrestling with some really tricky data error. Or perhaps you were totally lost in something physical, like rock climbing or running a route you didn't know well. Or maybe it was something creative, finally nailing that guitar part you've been struggling with for weeks.
Yeah, that feeling of finally getting it.
Exactly. And in that moment, everything else just vanishes. Your phone buzzes, you don't hear it, stomach growling, nope. And that little voice inside your head.
Oh yeah, the commentator.
The one that's always there, judging, critiquing.
Yeah, it's just silent. Gone on vacation. You're just so completely absorbed.
Utterly lost in it. That when you finally do surface, you glance at the clock and whoa, 3 hours have somehow evaporated. But it felt like, what, 15 minutes? Maybe?
Right, it's a genuine, measurable time warp. It feels unreal, but it's a real psychological phenomenon.
And that phenomenon, that peak state of, well, human experience, where productivity and even joy seem to converge.
That's our deep dive for today. We're talking about the flow experience.
Right. And this connects to what we talked about last week. We explored happiness maybe being a kind of perspective, didn't we?
Yeah.
Something you cultivate through cognitive shifts, like practicing gratitude.
Reframing your viewpoint.
But if that's one side of the coin, today we're digging into the idea that deep, real, lasting happiness isn't just perspective, it's also fundamentally a form of action.
It really is. We're basically opening up the instruction manual here. How do you actually engineer these peak moments? How do you build a life that has more of them?
And this isn't just, feel-good philosophy.
Yes, not at all. Flow is studied, it's measurable, it's a reproducible psychological state. It's basically the science behind what makes life feel truly meaningful, engaging, rewarding.
And the best part.
The best part is you don't have to just sit around and wait for lightning to strike. You can actually learn to set the stage to deliberately invite flow into your life more often.
Okay, so to really understand how to get into flow, how to control it, we need to start with the person who basically put it on the map.
Absolutely. The pioneer here, I guess you could call him the rock star of this particular field of psychology, is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi.
Okay, say that again slowly.
Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Yeah, it's a name that definitely challenges your spell checker.
Uh-huh.
But his work is just foundational, absolutely crucial. And interestingly, he didn't start out studying like office productivity or anything like that.
No. Where do you start?
He started by looking at people who did things purely for the love of doing them, for the intrinsic joy of the process itself. He spent time observing artists, surgeons, top athletes, composers, chess grandmasters.
So people really pushing the boundaries of skill and creativity. What was he looking for specifically in those groups?
Well, he was puzzled by something. Why would these incredibly dedicated people get so intensely wrapped up in what they were doing that they'd literally forget basic human needs? I mean, his research has stories of artists forgetting to eat for like 12 hours straight. Surgeons performing incredibly complex, long operations without even registering pain or fatigue until it was over. Mountain climbers pushing through extreme weather, completely consumed by the challenge of the climb itself.
Just totally zoned in.
Completely. And so he started asking them, what does that feel like? Describe that state of intense absorption. And a particular description kept coming up again and again. It was very specific, very metaphorical. They described it as being like carried away, or the most common one, like flowing in a river.
Flowing.
Well,
okay, I see where this is going.
Exactly. The action felt effortless, almost automatic, yet incredibly focused and directed. Like they were being guided by something external, but it also felt totally internal at the same time. And that core metaphor, well, they became the name for the state, flow.
Okay, so flow is that feeling of being carried along, totally immersed.
Yeah.
But how do we define it scientifically? What makes flow different from, say, just being really busy or, enjoying a casual hobby? There must be a distinction.
Oh, absolutely. That's the crucial distinction. Flow isn't just distraction. It's not relaxation in the typical sense. It's not just easy fun. Csikszentmihalyi defined it very precisely. It's the perfect meeting point, the convergence. He called it the sweet spot.
The sweet spot. Between what?
Between two key things, the level of your personal skills in that specific activity, and the level of the challenge the activity presents to you right now.
Skills versus challenge. Okay.
Yeah.
I think he visualized this, right, with a kind of chart or matrix.
He did, and it's incredibly useful. It's like a roadmap for understanding not just flow, but basically all our common psychological states, where we spend our emotional energy day to day.
How does that work? Let's map it out.
Okay, imagine a graph. On one axis, you have challenge, going from low to high. On the other axis, you have skill, also low to high.
Got it.
Now, flow exists as this relatively narrow channel running diagonally up through the middle of that graph, where high skill meets high challenge, essentially. But understanding the areas outside that channel is just as important.
Because that's where we usually are.
Exactly.
Okay.
Those are the kind of psychological traps we often fall into, the states we're constantly trying to avoid, consciously or not.
Okay, let's start with the common ones. What's outside that flow channel? Let's call it state 1. Boredom.
Right, boredom. This happens when your skill level is way higher than the challenge level. The task is just too easy. You know exactly how it's going to turn out. Think about, I don't know, filling out paperwork you've done a million times, or playing a video game you mastered ages ago. There's no real engagement.
The brain's not being used.
Precisely. And the psychological signal there is that your abilities, your potential, are being wasted. And that's actually quite debilitating. An underutilized mind often creates its own friction, its own negative energy. It can be more draining than doing something hard.
Interesting. Okay, so that's one side. What's the flip side? State 2, anxiety or frustration.
This is the opposite gap. Here, the challenge level towers over your current skill level.
Oh, I know this feeling.
We all do. You're trying to learn, say, a new complex software program and nothing makes sense. Or you get thrown into a project at work that you have zero background for. The gap between what's demanded and what you can do feels enormous.
Yeah, overwhelming.
Right. And the brain interprets that gap as a threat to your competence, maybe even your self-worth. And that triggers that classic panic response, that urge to just avoid the whole thing. That's anxiety in this context.
Okay, so we have boredom down low, anxiety up high.
Yeah.
But that matrix, that graph you mentioned, it probably shows more subtlety than just those two, right? It can't be just a simple on-off switch between boredom and panic.
Yeah.
What about the areas closer to the flow channel?
Exactly. There are crucial transitional zones. These are states we often experience when we're trying to get into flow or maybe when we're just starting to slip out of it.
Okay.
First, think about arousal. This is where the challenge is high, quite demanding, but your skill level is maybe only medium. You're not quite there yet.
So you're engaged, but it's stressful.
Very. You're stimulated, you're definitely trying hard, pushing yourself, but failure feels like a real distinct possibility. A lot of people actually mistake this state, this kind of stressful intensity, for flow.
Because it feels active.
Yeah, it's exciting, it gets the adrenaline going, but it still carries a significant load of stress, and your ego is very much involved because success isn't guaranteed. You're very aware of potentially messing up.
Right. Arousal is like you're climbing that steep learning curve, but you feel like you could slip back at any moment.
That's a great analogy. Precisely. And then the opposite of that is a state often called control or maybe relaxation.
Okay, what's that?
Here, your skill level is high, you're very competent at the task, but the challenge is only moderate. It's not really pushing you.
So you're cruising.
Pretty much. You're performing well, probably executing things flawlessly, it feels comfortable, it's enjoyable, definitely low stress, but it lacks that critical edge of difficulty. It doesn't demand that total, all-consuming focus that's necessary for true flow.
And if you stay there too long?
It decays. It slips down into boredom because you're not being stretched.
Got it. So boredom, anxiety, arousal, control, they all surround this central channel.
Which brings us back to flow, our sweet spot, that very specific, narrow diagonal path, where the activity is calibrated perfectly right at the edge of your current abilities.
Difficult enough that you absolutely have to concentrate. You need 100% of your focus right now. But just manageable enough that success feels possible, even likely, if you maintain that concentration.
That's it. Flow is where life feels most intense, in a good way, most productive, certainly, and arguably most joyful. It's an active state. It's about actively rejecting the apathy you feel in boredom and actively overcoming the paralysis you feel in anxiety.
Okay, so Csikszentmihalyi maps out the conditions, that delicate skill challenge balance. But then you have to figure out, what does it actually feel like on the inside? What's happening psychologically when someone successfully navigates that matrix and enters the flow channel?
Right. He went deeper and identified 8 fundamental characteristics. These are things that are pretty much universally present whenever someone describes being in a state of flow.
8 characteristics.
Yeah, and it's useful to think of them less as results of flow and more like the essential ingredients, the internal, let's call them superpowers, that you need to actually sustain the state. If any one of these disappears, the flow state tends to break down pretty quickly.
Okay, 8 superpowers. Let's walk through them. Where do we start? Maybe with the one that seems most obvious, but is actually incredibly deep. Number 1, absolute focus or concentration.
Yes. This isn't just paying attention like you might in a meeting. This is a state of hyperfocus. It's qualitatively different. Research, especially brain imaging studies, suggests that when you're truly in flow, your brain is actively filtering out almost everything else.
It's actively ignoring things.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It decides not to register maybe 99% of competing stimuli. You literally might not hear the air conditioning kick on or the traffic outside your window, a text notification. Your brain just doesn't process it.
Why? Is it just too busy?
Essentially, yes. All available cognitive resources are fully recruited for the task at hand. There's simply no bandwidth left for distractions. And this intense focus is only possible because the challenge is perfectly set.
Back to the balance.
Exactly. If the challenge was too low, you'd have spare mental capacity and your mind would wander. That's boredom setting in. If the challenge was too high, that spare capacity would be worrying, spinning its wheels. That's anxiety. So this intense focus is really the psychological symptom of hitting that perfect skill challenge match.
Okay, that makes sense. The focus proves the balance is right, which leads directly into number 2, right? The merging of action and awareness. This sounds like where the real magic happens. The shift from thinking about doing something to just doing it.
Exactly. This is huge. It's essentially the deactivation of the part of your brain that constantly monitors and directs the self. Think about learning something new, like driving a car for the first time.
Yeah, stressful.
Right. Every single action, checking the mirror, signaling, turning the wheel, pressing the pedal, requires conscious thought, a deliberate decision. That effortful awareness, that gap between thinking and doing, makes flow impossible.
Okay.
Now, contrast that with an experienced driver, maybe a race car driver, or even just someone who's been driving for 20 years. They just drive. There's no lag. Action and the awareness of the action become this single fluid process.
It's intuitive.
Purely intuitive.
Mhm.
The inner analyst, the part of you that strategizes and plans step by step, goes quiet. The performer takes over completely. And that state, that pure intuitiveness, is absolutely critical for any kind of deep work or high-level performance.
Okay, so if the performer is running the show, they need to know how they're doing moment by moment. Which brings us to superpower number 3, clear goals and immediate feedback.
Yes, this one is fundamental for keeping the flow state going. You need 2 things. First, absolute clarity on what you are trying to achieve right now. Not the big picture, but the immediate goal. And second, you need to know instantly whether the action you just took moved you closer to that goal or not. Was it successful or did it fail, even slightly?
The task itself needs to tell you how you're doing. Can you give some examples of this immediate feedback in action? Maybe in a work context.
Sure. Think about a software programmer. They write a chunk of code, they hit run, and bam, instant objective feedback.
Right. It either works or it throws an error.
Exactly. The system tells them precisely where they went wrong or confirms they got it right. No ambiguity. Or think about maybe a carpenter hitting a nail. They know instantly from the sound and feel if the strike was clean and effective. A chef tasting a sauce knows immediately if the balance is right or if it needs adjusting.
So the feedback loop is super tight.
Super tight, continuous, objective assessment. And this is incredibly motivating. It fuels the drive to continue because you're constantly getting these little signals of progress or clear directions for correction, tiny wins and adjustments.
And what about tasks where that isn't the case?
Well, contrast that with something like writing a long report that won't get reviewed for weeks or months.
Yeah.
Or having a vague goal like become a better public speaker.
Yeah, how do you measure that moment to moment?
You can't easily. That fuzziness, that delay in feedback, it creates psychological friction. It makes flow much harder to achieve because you lack that constant, clear reinforcement. Flow thrives on crystal clear targets and instant results.
Okay, and that immediate clear feedback loop must directly support number 4, a sense of control.
Absolutely. It's counterintuitive maybe, because remember, you're operating right at the edge of your abilities. The task is objectively difficult.
Right.
But a key characteristic of flow is this unwavering, absolute belief that you are in full control of your actions within the defined boundaries of that task. It's not about controlling the outcome necessarily or the external world, but controlling your interaction with the challenge itself.
That's the fascinating part for me. If the challenge is high, wouldn't you logically feel, well, kind of overwhelmed, maybe a bit out of control? How does the brain create that feeling of total control when things are hard?
It seems to be a kind of cognitive reframing, strongly supported by those clear boundaries and immediate feedback we just talked about. Because the goal is clear, superpower #3, and you know instantly if your actions are working. You know that every move you make, every adjustment, every decision is being registered. It counts. So you don't feel like a victim of the difficulty. You feel like you're actively meeting it. You have confidence in your ability to navigate, to adjust, to respond effectively in real time. The underlying feeling is, okay, this is tough, but I can handle this step right now.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Control over the immediate process, not necessarily the grand outcome.
Exactly.
Which leads us to number 5, and this loops back to our intro. Loss of self-consciousness. The ego takes a vacation. This might be the one that feels most freeing for people. How does this happen? If flow demands maximum focus, how does the self-judging part of the brain just switch off?
Yeah, this is one of the most fascinating aspects, and there's some cool neuroscience looking into it. When we talk about the ego or self-consciousness, we're often talking about the activity in certain parts of the prefrontal cortex, particularly the medial prefrontal cortex, or MPFC.
Okay.
That area is heavily involved in things like self-reflection, thinking about what others think of us, social judgment, worrying about future consequences. Basically, it's the home of the inner critic and that constant internal narrator.
Like the voice that asks, am I doing this right? Do I look stupid?
Precisely. Now, during deep flow states, studies suggest something called temporary hypofrontality occurs.
Hypofrontality, meaning less activity.
Exactly. Hypo, meaning under or less.
Yeah.
Certain parts of that prefrontal cortex, specifically those linked to self-monitoring, critical judgment, worrying about how you appear, actually quiet down significantly.
I'll cough line.
Pretty much. The brain seems to decide, okay, these functions aren't essential for the immediate task and they're resource intensive. So it diverts those cognitive resources entirely to processing the task at hand. You literally stop asking, how am I doing? And you just do. The focus shifts 100% to the action, not the self-performing the action.
The performer takes over from the manager, like I said. Wow. Okay, that makes perfect sense. And then number 6, the big one, transformation of time, the time warp.
Ah, yes. This is often the most dramatic and noticeable characteristic for people because it feels like a genuine distortion of reality. And as you mentioned earlier, time seems to bend in 2 distinct ways during flow.
Right. The first way, which is probably the most common experience, is acceleration. Time just flies.
The classic example. You sit down to work on something engaging, you get absorbed, and suddenly you look up, the sun's going down, and you realize 6 hours have somehow vanished. It felt like maybe half an hour.
Why does that happen? How does time speed up?
The current thinking is that it's a byproduct of that intense focus and high cognitive utilization we talked about. Your brain is so busy processing the complex, challenging task at hand that it essentially stops allocating resources to its usual timekeeping functions. Tracking the passage of minutes and hours becomes irrelevant to the immediate goal, so the brain just stops logging it. Time registration effectively ceases because all processors are busy elsewhere.
Fascinating. But then there's the other effect, which sounds even stranger, deceleration. Time slows down.
Yeah, this one is often reported on really high-stakes, critical moments. You hear about it from elite athletes, fighter pilots, ER surgeons, people in crisis situations.
What do they describe?
They'll report that during a crucial split-second sequence of events, like an athlete making a game-winning play or a surgeon dealing with a sudden complication, everything seems to unfold in slow motion. They perceive more detail, more time between events than actually exists.
How on earth does that work biologically? If acceleration is about the brain being too busy to track time, what causes the opposite?
It's thought to be the brain essentially maximizing its temporal resolution. In those acute, high-challenge, high-stakes moments where precise action is critical, the brain goes into overdrive, processing sensory information at an incredibly rapid rate. It's taking in far more data points per second than it normally would.
So seeing more frames per second almost.
That's a good analogy. It's capturing a much richer, denser stream of reality. Then, when your brain reconstructs that memory later, or even processes it in the moment, that short period contains vastly more detail than a typical memory of the same duration. To make sense of all that extra detail, the subjective experience of time has to stretch out.
So you're not literally slowing time, you're just processing reality much, much faster, which makes reality seem slower in comparison.
Exactly. It's an incredible adaptation. It allows for that hyper-precise, real-time decision-making and action that would be impossible in a normal state of perception.
That is truly amazing. Okay, so this whole incredible package, the focus, the control, the weird time stuff, it all builds towards something. Number 7, the autotelic experience.
Yes. Autotelic, it literally means self-goal. The activity becomes its own reward. And this, for Csikszentmihalyi, is the absolute core link between flow and living a genuinely happy, meaningful life.
So it's not about what you get at the end, it's about the doing itself.
Precisely. The motivation for doing the activity isn't primarily about external rewards. You're not doing it just for the money or the applause or the grade or even the final finished product necessarily. The process of engaging in the activity, the challenge, the execution, that is the reward. The joy and satisfaction are generated by the action itself.
Can you contrast that with other types of motivation or happiness?
Sure, we need to distinguish this from purely extrinsic motivation, doing something only for an external payoff, like a paycheck for a job you hate, and also from purely hedonic pursuits.
Hedonic meaning pleasure-seeking.
Right. Hedonic pleasure, like eating a fantastic piece of cake or watching your favorite movie, is great, but it's often passive, relatively effortless, and the feeling tends to be fleeting. Autotelic activities, the ones that generate flow, fall into a different category of well-being, sometimes called eudaimonic well-being.
Eudaimonic, like flourishing.
Exactly. It's the kind of deeper satisfaction and happiness that comes from effort, from developing competence, from overcoming challenges, from living up to your potential. It's earned, not just consumed.
So just clocking in at a boring job for the paycheck is extrinsic and probably not very fulfilling. But if you can find a way to introduce challenge within that job, maybe streamline a tedious process, master a new skill related to it.
Then the activity itself starts to shift. It stops feeling like just labor and starts becoming rewarding simply because you're engaged in the process of mastering it, improving it. You're finding flow within it.
That's a powerful shift in perspective.
It's the critical finding, really. Happiness isn't something you just find or passively receive. It's something you actively generate through intentional, challenging, skillful action, through finding flow.
Okay, and that brings us to the last one, number 8, which feels like it loops back to the very beginning. It's the regulator, right? The balance challenge.
Exactly. This ties everything together, brings us right back to that skill challenge matrix. All those other 7 superpowers. The focus, the merging, the feedback, control, loss of self, time warp, autotelic reward, they all depend entirely on maintaining that sweet spot, that narrow channel between your skill and the task's challenge.
It's dynamic.
Highly dynamic. If your skills improve, maybe you practice something a lot, you must consciously increase the level of challenge. Otherwise,
You slip into control, then boredom.
instantly, the flow state collapses. Conversely, if some external factor suddenly jacks up the difficulty way beyond your current ability,
Anxiety takes over.
right, the state collapses into anxiety or frustration. So flow isn't a static place you arrive at. It's a state you have to constantly cultivate and adjust to maintain. It requires vigilance.
Okay, this all sounds incredibly powerful. Peak experience, productivity, joy, meaning. But it also sounds maybe a little fragile, like it's easy to fall out of that channel.
It can be, especially in our modern world.
So if flow really is the gold standard for, well, living well, we need practical strategies. How do we stop just hoping it happens randomly and start deliberately setting the stage for it? Let's shift into application mode. How can we engineer these conditions more often?
Absolutely. And the good news is, because flow is a defined psychological state based on identifiable conditions, both internal and external, we can influence the inputs. We can use those 8 superpowers almost like a checklist, an instruction set for how to set up our activities in our environment.
All right, let's do it. Tip number 1 seems obvious. Directly tackling superpower, #1, that absolute focus. Create your flow cave, which basically means kill the distractions.
Ruthlessly. We have to be honest with ourselves here. In today's world, distraction is probably the #1 enemy of flow. Our devices, our notifications, our open plan offices, they are practically designed to break concentration.
We're wired for it, aren't we? To notice the new thing, the flashing light.
We are. We have a biological novelty bias. That vibrating phone, that little red notification badge, they're like kryptonite to focus. They hijack our attention mechanism.
So what's the practical advice? Is just putting the phone on silent enough?
Probably not, honestly. Studies have shown that even just the visual presence of your smartphone on your desk, even if it's off or silent, can actually drain some of your cognitive resources.
Seriously, just seeing it.
Yeah, because a part of your brain remains subconsciously primed, anticipating a potential interaction. It's subtly dividing your attention.
Wow, okay, so the discipline needs to be stricter.
Much stricter. The truly practical step is turn the phone completely silent, no vibrate, and then, crucially, put it out of sight.
Hide it.
Yes. Put it in a drawer. Put it in another room. Physically remove the temptation. Remove the visual cue. You have to make distraction require significant effort. And it's not just the phone. Look at your workspace. Is it cluttered?
Mine usually is.
Visual clutter creates mental clutter. Tidy up. Your immediate workspace should ideally contain only the things strictly necessary for the task you're about to do. Everything else is a potential distraction.
Okay, clean desk, phone hidden. What about noise? If you're in a noisy environment you can't control, like an office.
Good question. Auditory aids can help, but you need to choose carefully. Headphones are good, but what you listen to matters. The best options are usually non-lyrical, repetitive kinds of music.
Like classical, or those lo-fi hip-hop streams.
Exactly. Classical ambient music, maybe some electronic music without vocals, lo-fi beats. The key is no lyrics. Why?
Because lyrics engage the language part of the brain.
Precisely. Processing language, especially speech or singing, demands significant cognitive resources. It directly competes with superpower #2, that merging of action and awareness. It pulls your focus away from the task itself, so instrumental only, if possible.
Got it. Protect the focus bubble at all costs.
Okay.
Tip number 2, this tackles superpower #8, the balance challenge. Adjust the difficulty,
Right.
which is just by a little bit.
Just by a notch. This is the conscious act of preventing that slide into boredom once you start getting good at something. If you've truly mastered a task, it stops being flow-inducing. It just becomes mechanical, maybe even tedious.
Right.
So to re-engage flow or to deepen it, you have to deliberately nudge the challenge level just slightly above where your skill currently sits. You have to consciously stretch yourself, introduce a little bit of productive friction.
It has to be a stretch, though, not a massive leap that throws you into anxiety, right?
Absolutely. Critical distinction. It's a small step up, not jumping off a cliff. Can you give some examples? How would someone apply this stretch principle in different areas?
Okay, let's say you're a musician, and you can play a certain piece perfectly at its normal tempo. The stretch could be, try playing it 10% faster. Or maybe try playing it with more dynamic variation, focusing intensely on the expression. You're adding a layer of difficulty.
Good one. Or say you're a writer, and you've gotten comfortable writing in a certain style. The stretch might be, try writing the next piece, using a narrative technique you find tricky, like, say, maintaining a really close third-person perspective. Or challenge yourself to convey a specific emotion using only dialogue, no descriptive adjectives.
So you're adding constraints or raising the performance bar.
Exactly. If you're, let's say, coding something, maybe the code works, that's functional, but the stretch could be, can I refactor this to make it 20% more efficient? Can I write it using fewer lines? Can I make it more elegant or readable?
The goal shifts from just getting it done to getting it done better or differently.
Precisely. You're artificially keeping the task demanding enough that it requires your full concentration. That's what sustains flow. And as a bonus, you're constantly incrementally improving your skills. You're actively raising your own ceiling.
Okay, constantly nudging the challenge up.
Yep, got it.
And finally, tip number 3. This connects back to superpower #3, clear goals and immediate feedback. Set microscopic goals.
Yes. This is about combating overwhelm and ensuring that constant feedback loop. Thinking about a huge amorphous task, finish writing my thesis or launch this entire new product line, it's paralyzing.
Yeah, it just generates anxiety. It feels too big.
Way too big. And it completely violates the need for immediate feedback. How do you get instant feedback on finished thesis? You don't. It works directly against the sense of control needed for flow.
So flow needs focus on the very next step, the thing right in front of you. How small do these microscopic goals need to be?
Really small. Think time-bound and immediately verifiable. Let's take that, right, a 10-page analysis example. That's too big for a flow goal. A microscopic goal would be, for the next 25 minutes, time-bound, I will focus only on outlining the main argument for section 1 and finding 3 key supporting quotes.
That's very specific.
Very specific, very measurable. At the end of 25 minutes, you know instantly. Did I do that? Yes or no? There is your immediate feedback.
And that feels manageable.
Totally manageable. It tricks your brain. Your brain looks at that tiny goal and says, oh, I can definitely do that. The perceived challenge drops, reducing anxiety. And achieving that tiny goal gives you a little dopamine hit, a sense of progress, which fuels the motivation to set the next tiny goal. You build momentum.
So you're breaking the mountain down into a series of conquerable molehills.
Exactly. And each conquered molehill provides the clear feedback and sense of control needed to keep you moving, to keep you in that flow channel. It's about managing your psychology as much as managing the task.
It really is amazing when you break it down. This state of peak performance, this feeling that can seem so effortless, almost mystical when you're in it, is actually the result of carefully engineering these simple, quite precise psychological conditions. #outro.
And that's really the synthesis of this whole deep dive, isn't it? Flow isn't just some fleeting, nice feeling you might stumble upon occasionally if you're lucky. Csikszentmihalyi's big argument was that flow is essentially the scientifically validated path to that deeper kind of happiness we talked about, eudaimonic happiness.
It's the essence of a life lived well, lived purposefully.
He believed so. The more often we intentionally structure our days, our work, our leisure time to create the conditions for flow.
By managing those distractions, setting challenges right at the edge of our skills, choosing activities we find intrinsically rewarding.
The higher our overall life satisfaction tends to become, because we're regularly deriving that deep joy and meaning from the action itself, not just waiting for some future outcome or external reward.
We stop chasing happiness as some destination out there.
Exactly. We realize that we create happiness moment by moment every time we successfully engage with that sweet spot, that perfect balance between skill and challenge.
So let's leave our listeners with a direct question this week, a provocative thought, maybe a challenge.
Okay.
What puts you into flow? Seriously, take a moment this week and identify it. We all have something. Maybe it is complex analysis for work. Maybe it's playing a sport intensely. Maybe it's a creative pursuit like painting or coding or playing music. Maybe it's even just deep, focused problem solving.
Whatever it is for you.
Find it.
Yeah.
And then the challenge is schedule more time for it this week. Intentionally. Create that flow cave we talked about. Turn the phone off, put it away. Clear the decks, and just give yourself the permission, the luxury of letting time bend for a while.
See what happens when you prioritize it. And speaking of those flow characteristics, specifically that moment when the ego takes a vacation, that loss of self-consciousness.
Yeah.
Well, next week, we're going to dive into what happens when that ego comes back online, so to speak, and interacts with the social world.
Ah, right. When we start worrying about what everyone else is thinking again, the psychological trap where we feel like we're constantly under a microscope.
Exactly. We'll be exploring the spotlight effect.
The spotlight effect. Okay.
We're going to unpack the deeply ingrained psychological reasons why we consistently and often dramatically overestimate how much other people are actually noticing us. Especially our mistakes, our flaws, our awkward moments, that persistent illusion that everyone is watching me.
Understanding that bias, realizing how much we overestimate scrutiny, can be almost as liberating as finding flow, I imagine.
It really can. It frees up a lot of mental energy.
Okay, looking forward to that. So join us next time as we shine a light, maybe ironically, on the spotlight effect.
Until then, try to stay focused, keep challenging yourself, and find your flow.
We'll see you next week on The Deep Dive.